Hello there. So I'm back again with another video, and today we'll talk about REST APIs. What is REST API? And we'll try to see what are the use cases it solves and why we use it. So REST stands for Representational State Transfer, and it is a software architectural style that describes a uniform interface between the physical separate components often across the internet in a client-server architecture. So to use REST, there will be a client and there will be a server. Client will call the server using the REST APIs. A REST API, also known as RESTful APIs, is an application programming interface API or web API that conforms to the constraint of REST architectural style and allows for interaction with RESTful web services. REST stands for Representational State Transfer and was created by computer scientist Roy Fielding. REST API provides a flexible, lightweight way to integrate applications and have emerged as the most common method of connecting components in microservice architecture. So why we use REST? REST API is an interface that we use it to communicate between the two computers or the two applications to exchange information securely over the internet. Most business applications have to communicate with other internal and third-party applications to perform virtual tasks. We can use REST APIs to do this. So a typical REST API basics include this HTTP GET, POST or PATCH, and so our clients send the HTTP request from GET, POST, PATCH or update. REST API receives the request from the client and does whatever request needs and create. So for example, if I need to create the user, update the user, I can do that with the help of REST APIs. REST API then will call some functions that will do the query or insert, update, delete on the database. When the REST API has what it needs, it sends back a response to the client. This would typically be in a JSON or XML format. A typical HTTP verbs which we use in REST is get, put, patch, post and delete. REST is stateless because it is based on HTTP protocol and HTTP protocol is stateless. So let's understand what is API. So an API is a set of definition and protocol for building and integrating application softwares. It is sometimes referred to as the contract between an information provider and information user, establishing the content required from the consumer, which calls the API, and the content required by the producer, which produces or writes the API, which is the server. For example, if you can use the API to get data of weather, or you can use API of Google Map to get the data of maps. In other words, if you want to interact with a computer or a system or an application to retrieve information or perform a function, an API helps you communicate what you want to that system so it can understand and fulfill the request. You can think of an API as a mediator between the user or the clients and the resource of the web services they want to get. It is also a way for an organization to share resources and information while maintaining security, control, authentication, determining who gets access to what. So we need to make sure that REST API or any API should be secure as well. Who can call the API? Authorization needs to be maintained over there. Another advantage of REST API is that you don't have to know the specifics of caching, how your resource is retrieved, or whether from where it is coming. So REST in action, it works like whether you have a mobile app or web browser, to call the API using the HTTP methods such as get, post, put or delete, and REST server response that in the form of XML or JSON, whatever format you have defined, your application has defined. A typical architecture looks like this, where and from Android, iPhone or browser, you make a JSON or XML with body and call the REST API using any of the HTTP verbs, and your application server responds with the corresponding text or file or images or JSON or XML. So we have these four verbs post, get, put, and delete. Post we typically use for create, get we use for rest, for read, put we used for update, and delete we use for deleting the resources. These questions comes in the interview as well. So this is a bit different from the event-driven architecture, where in event-driven we client subscribes to the event, and as soon as they receive the event notification, client takes action. But in case of REST, it's a request response kind of, between the consumer and provider. You have to request to get something from the provider in the form of response. A RESTful API uses commands to obtain the resources. The state of the resources at any given timestamp is called the resource representation. A RESTful API uses existing HTTP methodologies defined by the RFC 2616 protocol, such as GET, which is used to retrieve a resource, PUT to change the state of or update a resource, which can be object files or block, POST to create that resource, and DELETE to remove it. Data formats which is supported in REST API are XML, JSON, form data. So this is one of the example of REST, where you can see we have an endpoint. We need to define the endpoint, which will be called by the client. We also need to define the HTTP method using which it will be called. Then the HTTP headers, such as application/JSON, and then the body, the request payload, and the response of it will be the response payload, the response body. So these are the basics of REST APIs. If you have any question related to REST API, do write in the comment section. And what are the design principles that we follow to write? So it should be uniform. It should follow the uniform interface. All API requests for the same resource should look the same, no matter whether the request comes from. The REST API should ensure that the same piece of data, such as the name or email address of a user, belongs to only one uniform resource identifier. Then the second principle says client-server decoupling. In REST API design, client and server application must be completely independent of each other. The only information the client application should know is the URI of the requested resource. Statelessness. As I said, it is based on HTTP protocol, and HTTP protocol is stateless. REST APIs are stateless, meaning that each request needs to include all the information needed or necessary for the processing. In other words, REST API do not require any server-side sessions. Server applications are not allowed to store any data related to the client request. Fourth is the cacheability. When possible, resources should be cacheable on the client or the server side. Server response also needs to contain information about whether caching allowed for the delivered resources or not. The goal is to improve the performance on the client side while increasing the scalability on the server side. And the fifth design principle is layered system architecture. In REST API, the calls and the response go through different layers. As a rule of thumb, don't assume that client and server applications connect directly to each other. There may be a number of different intermediaries in the communication loop. So these are the different design principles we should take care while designing the REST APIs. So thank you so much for watching today's video, and if you think the videos are helpful, do like the video and subscribe to the channel.